Welcome to the Intrazone, a show about the SharePoint Intelligent Intranet. I'm Chris McNulty, here as always with Mark Cashman.
Hello, hello!
It is great to be back here in Las Vegas for the 28th time.
It's been a long, many Vegas trips. I think you know how to get around Vegas now.
So today is very special because we are recording day one, right after the keynote. We're going to be sitting down in just a few minutes with
Jeff Teper. We got a lot of claps in the keynote, and we want to get from Jeff what are the ones that he was most excited about?
What do we hear? He's the team captain.
He liked team captain, not godfather, not grandfather, team captain.
Team captain of SharePoint, OneDrive, Office, OMG.
OMG, oh my goodness.
Right. It's amazing to be back here in Las Vegas. Mark, let me just ask you quickly, day one of the conference, initial impressions.
It's great. It's really nice to see the community as always. I sometimes forget, when you travel on the plane and you think, oh, I'm just going to the conference, and I forget that I'm just going to see a ton of faces that I know. And in the back of my mind, I'm thinking, okay, finish the blog, get your session ready. What do they need for the keynote? Dan is doing a wonderful job, Dan Holm. But first impressions landing on the ground was things were going really smoothly. Always with keynote, you've got last minute things. And the keynote prep last night and then delivery this morning I thought was really good. And already getting ready for sessions and hearing feedback from what the attendees are already getting. So far, so good. Seems like really smooth sailing and really good information outset. My
initial impression is it's bigger. It's definitely a much larger event than it was last year, and just the scale and scope of it it's a refreshing reminder of how passionate our community, our leaders, our engineers are about everything that we're doing here. One thing that we will definitely make sure we get in the show notes, if you were listening to this, you may be at the conference. If so, why aren't you at a session right now? But if you're participating in this after the fact, please, we will include a link to the SharePoint Virtual Summit. Our entire keynote was streamed online, and you're going to be able to participate in that from the comfort of your own home, car, pod, hammock, wherever you get your work done.
And actually, the short audio link for you is aka.ms/SPC/summit.
That's really impressive. Hey, as with all things, I have to sneak in a gratuitous baseball reference.
I thought you were going to at least go for basketball. It looked like there was a big win last night.
There was a big win. It's going to be, so the Warriors, it's their 5th time in a row that they're going to the championship, putting them in the league with my favorite hometown, New York Islanders, who did it 1980 to 1984. Enough of that. You're at the Intrazone. We're giving you nothing but Jeff Teper Unplugged. So events, FAQ, all your longtime favorites, we'll save those for the next podcast.
It's all about Jeff.
Up next, Jeff Teper sitting down with Mark Cashman and me.
Are you ready to enter the Intrazone?
Yes, I feel like I'm Al Pacino in The Godfather 2, Mr. Congressman. And somebody taps you on the shoulder and tells you something's
One day, Jeff, I will ask you for a feature. If you do not deliver on this feature... Well, we are live here in Las Vegas. I will say again from a SharePoint Conference perspective, but for the second time on the Intrazone, we have Jeff Teper joining us. Jeff, welcome to the Intrazone again.
Thank you, Mark and Chris. It's great to be back.
We're here at SharePoint Conference 2019, and I know people have had reflections about, 5 years ago this happened at the Venetian, or what happened at Mandalay Bay. We're talking technically. We're not talking after hours. So, but I'd love to get one of your favorite memories from at one of the earliest SharePoint conferences.
Yeah, there was one where we had an attendee party, and it might have been at the Mandalay Bay, and I walked around the party, and I'd seen the attendee list and knew people had come from around the world. But when people come up to you and introduce you and they say, I'm from New Zealand, I'm from South America, I'm from Turkey, it's just, and they came to a conference on the other side of the planet to learn about the latest SharePoint innovations and meet with people in the community. That memory probably stands out more than ever. It's just the sheer scale of people who are excited to come to an event like this.
I'm also sometimes fascinated by the people who come to every one of these events. When you factor in some of the third-party things, and we go to conferences and be like, didn't I see you in South Africa 3 weeks ago? And they're like, oh, yes.
Yeah, there was one, and gosh, I hope I don't get him into trouble. I don't think I will, but Simeon Cathay, some of you know, worked in the SharePoint team in the very early days when we had more manual testing at that point than automated. And Simeon led that team, and he later went on and did a couple of things in the community, and now works at Content Panda with Heather Newman and does some other stuff. I just ran into him, and he lives in Hawaii, has a great life, and yet continues to want to connect to the community. And so it's pretty amazing.
I just liked how in your keynote you actually dedicate time not to just thank the community, but to welcome new people into the community.
Yes.
And really to address that it is a wonderful community.
Yeah, because there are stories like that. There's also people who are like Kevin Schramm in the keynote, people who may not have been deep in SharePoint a few years ago, but now is betting a multi-billion-dollar acquisition success on combining the culture of two companies impacting 50,000 employees in a matter of weeks, whether people are going to understand and act as one or not. And so that is an incredibly mission-critical communications change management effort based on SharePoint. And so it's fantastic to have both newcomers to an event like this, but also some of the old-time community too.
No, I think that's a great point. I mean, it is humbling to see the ability of this technology to connect people from the community around all over the world, but on a much more practical basis, for an organization that needs to connect its people, it's a great means to do that.
Yes. It is fun to just sit back in some of the bright space between the sessions or in the hallways. There's a portion on the second or third floor where it's a sort of elevated seating area, and you can see people sitting down and mingling and chatting there, and it's a great part of this event that we sort of sometimes forget between the sessions and the parties is just talking to other people.
Yeah, I agree. I've heard you say one of your favorite things is a focus on fundamentals, like performance. And one of the big themes that you spent time on in the keynote was this notion of turbocharging Microsoft 365, and there was a focus on files in that perspective, but it was a broader than files. What does that mean for people when they use SharePoint, OneDrive, Office, now and going forward, things getting turbocharged?
There's been a lot of studies in usability design about how important performance is. People certainly talk about it in the most monetizable way, where search engine vendors, if they don't return a page quickly enough, how much that money that translates. And that's been always true in Office. As we shifted to the graphical user interface from character mode years ago, the hockey stick in Windows and Office happened when the performance got fast enough. Same thing on the web, when we all switched from dial-up to having DSL or cable modems in our house. When we went to 2G and 3G on our phone, there was sort of a hockey stick of adoption. And with the cloud, a lot of people's data is now no longer down the hallway. It's around the world, and we've got to make sure that we can get to it in near the speed of light and reduce the chattiness back and forth. And so there's been a lot of work we've done in Office and SharePoint and Azure so that you can open a large PowerPoint. Like today's keynote, the slide deck we used for today's keynote was quite huge, and I had to review some of the slides for it this morning. When I open up PowerPoint, what it does is go fetch the first couple of slides. I can start looking at those, and in the background, it brings the next few down. And that seems sort of like an obvious thing. That's how the web works. But we had to re-architect how we pass files around between Office and SharePoint in order to do that. So it's our job for people to not even think about this stuff, for it just to be fast.
Back-end fundamentals are essential, but another place that we see you and the team really doubling down is in design. We've been investing in the Fluent Design Initiative and things like the Lookbook. What do you think are the biggest reasons why and how we achieve design excellence?
Again, sort of 10, 20 years ago, people were willing to tolerate experiences that weren't quite so simple because they weren't quite as dependent on technology every day and for every employee. And now that so much of every business process involves a screen of some sort, it could be a phone or desktop form factor or something like that, and people's time is very precious. We've got to make it usable, first of all, but also engaging. So they want to come back and use it again and use it as a way to convey information to other people. And so when I came back into the SharePoint team about, I guess it's been almost 4 years, one of the things that was sort of on my to-do list to amp up versus the past was really an amp up in design. So I spent quite a bit of time with the design team we had, hiring some new people, expanding the team, and Denise Turbono was one of the hires we made in the team, and Denise leads the SharePoint design. And we gave her the space to hire people and just obsess over every last detail of the design. Working with her peers in design in our team, like Tyler Rasmussen and Ken Fry, who's Denise's manager, and the design directors across Microsoft, it was clear to us that we needed to not just make each individual product easier to use and more engaging, but it needed to work better as a system. We heard that the silos that we had built up internally that maybe led to more agility for each team in Microsoft were coming out the other door as things that our customers had to stitch together. And as we came up with the strategy, we announced that the future is SharePoint 3 years ago, where things are more componentized, where flow is inside SharePoint. SharePoint projects a files experience that's in OneDrive and in Teams. The SharePoint home sites gives you an out-of-box intranet that has components from Yammer and Stream. If those things have different design languages and different interaction models, it's cacophony. And so it became important that not only we optimize the design in each product, but we work together. And so that's where 2 years ago we introduced something called the Fluent Design Language at Microsoft that is a bit more modern and evolved from the previous MDL, Microsoft Design Language, that some people might have remembered as Metro. And I think design experts in the industry have raved about what we've done with Fluent. Coincidentally, the SharePoint and OneDrive team, Tyler's team in OneDrive, came up with the components, the web toolkit for implementing our design language for third-party developers as well. Because again, you don't want just SharePoint and Teams or Yammer and SharePoint looking good. You want the custom solutions looking good. And so we have to project this design language into customer and partner solutions. And so at Build, our developer conference, we introduced our Fabric UI toolkit that supports now this new Fluent design language as well as the previous MDL language. And you'll start seeing that across all the Microsoft products. And so that's probably more geeking out on design language than you wanted, but it's been a big investment.
We hear it as a super important thing because people are complimenting, like, I actually do like the SharePoint site. I do want to share that and promote it. So it's a bit different. What I hear are people that are proud of what they've set up. Not that it's functional and does what it needs to do, but that they can lead with it and know that people are going to like it.
It's really interesting. There is a dialectic that's going on. Some of the stuff that we're building, like some of the templates and downloads that my team are building, the white papers, the demo environments, all of that. The design team is getting involved in those and really challenging us to think through, well, what's the customer experience? What's the user experience? Not just in product, but making sure that we have a very broad definition of what it means to be product.
Yeah.
And I think it's, it challenges us a bit, but I think it's a great initiative.
Yeah, and one other thing that's sort of related to that I see in the back of Mark's Surface right now, one of the things that I was most passionate about, and my passion exceeded some people's expectations internally, was...
It sounds like a really dangerous line.
was evolving the icons. Because our icons, they're the first thing you see when you see our product. Most people wouldn't be able to articulate it, but those came from different color palettes, different perspectives, different philosophies on shadowing and depth, and you can't really explain it, but from the first get-go, it doesn't, because they don't look like a family, it doesn't look like the products work as well together, and because it's a different design language, it doesn't convey it's modern. But you would not believe when you have to design these icons that address accessibility by everybody, usability, the ability to scale big to small, land in places like the system tray for the OneDrive icon, sit in color on black like on the Windows taskbar, in white sitting on phones. That was a signal both externally but also internally that we're going to take real pride in craftsmanship from the get-go and how our products compose together. And I just love picking up my phone and seeing our icon family and seeing right there the Microsoft products are easy to use, modern, and designed to work as a family.
I think it's great. I love that if we hadn't taken on Fluent Design, we might have had to innovate SharePoint duct tape.
Yeah.
To piece it all together.
Yeah. Yeah.
So let's move on to sort of
Sure.
the day's announcements. Today being the SharePoint Conference 2019, May 21st. You and your team up on stage announced a ton of stuff. You even said what we did on the blogs. We blogged about a ton more. But let's land on a couple things, starting with what you were most excited to reveal today.
Probably, let me start with one thing that I think will impact everybody every day is the simplified sharing integration with Outlook and Teams. That I'm really proud, going back to this sort of new platform composed experience strategy, that we deliver from the cloud, from SharePoint, a new sharing experience designed by our OneDrive team that plugs into all our apps on all platforms. And so when IT sets policies or when end users make choices about whether they want links to be forwarded or not, it's a consistent experience across apps and platforms. But we had one more step to take, which was really integrating that inside Teams and Outlook, because you had to go get that link from OneDrive and SharePoint or share from there. And that's not all the ways people work. They often do, they hit the paperclip. And we wanted to make the paperclip magic, that it knew who you were sending email to in Outlook. It knew what channel and the channel permissions in Teams. It helped you through this choice about whether you wanted things forwardable or not beyond that immediate set of people. It enforced IT policies and set us up as we innovated in the future, that it was future-proof, that you didn't have to install new software on the desktop, or the phone. It just got magic. So that was a great thing. And Jason Moore showed a lot of other stuff, but that was one that I was particularly excited about. Differential sync was cool. Again, SharePoint Caruana helped show SharePoint lists and document libraries with really rich formatting. This sort of, we glazed over that a little bit because we've talked about it in previous events, but this conditional formatting with bar charts and visualizations and custom schema and having that augmented by AI and flow, this sort of business process meets AI on a rich SharePoint list and library, all sitting inside Teams and interacting with Teams in, via actionable messages. There's a lot there. I just said a lot, but it is, this pattern of modern solutions powered by SharePoint, I'm really excited about. We talked about the architecture investments, and I re-showed the work that Satya talked about at Build with the Fluid framework and how it's building on SharePoint. Home sites was great. It was great to get even more out of the box with Stream and Yammer in SharePoint and see, you guys would know the exact number of partners that we had that were home site partners.
Yeah, there was, I think, about 20 or so on the slide.
Yeah. One of our tensions is, as we innovate in the SharePoint user experience, how can we bring customers and partners with us? I always sort of stress about this, that as we do this new design work, where tomorrow's SharePoint's better than today's design, will anybody know? Will they get the UI, or have they so customized that they don't get it to shine through? And we've been working really hard in the last couple of years so that the UX innovation shines through, that you don't have to switch modes to some future modern mode or something like that. And so to have these really innovative companies embrace home sites and communication sites in their UI was great. Naomi showed some work at the end, Microsoft Search. I'm really proud about that. I talked about the machine learning and how teams like Bing and Office and SharePoint are working together on that. And so
those are good, and they're a lot. One of the ones that I am just personally excited to give a try is that from the new Stream mobile app, you'd be able to upload your own videos. So sort of recording on the go, sharing back with your team.
Joe Belfiore, who runs the Windows Experience and Edge team, and I co-host an event of Microsoft product leaders, and we had one back in March, and it's sort of TED Talk style, where different product leaders come up and give their pitch on what they've learned. And Chris Prattley, who works for me, longtime amazing Office product leader, worked on Word, did OneNote, did Sway, and now leads our OMG team, the Office Media Group.
Best acronym, by the way.
And so Chris, Stream is in that group. And Chris reminded us at that event what we all know, which is in people's personal lives, they're increasingly switching to video as the basis of communication. A little quick video to tell a story, celebrate an event. It could be, a not-for-profit cause. It could be some celebrating a birthday. And there really shouldn't be any reason why that applies in business. And in fact, we've been embracing Stream and trying to get it, as much as we use Stream for things like live events and the CEO town hall. Satya gets up, does the monthly town hall, it's hosted on Stream, people collaborate on Yammer, that's great. But it would be really a tragedy if that's all that video was in business. And so what Chris and the Stream team are trying to do is democratize video, much like SharePoint democratized websites, PowerPoint democratized presentations. We forget about this, right? It used to be a special tiny number of people who would make websites and slide presentations. And so why not the same with video? Why not have the engineering team for a new product record a short little video and say, hey, let me talk about this new engineering innovation, record the 2-minute video, send it out to the team. It's there on Stream so anybody can find it. It's there it soon will be in the Microsoft Graph and Microsoft Search to be searchable. And we're going to wake up in 2-3 years and say, oh my God, where did this video transformation come from at work? And it has to start with making it super simple for somebody. Imagine all the people from our team who are here at the SharePoint conference open up that Stream mobile app now and say, hey, I don't have time to write this down. I just met with a customer. They told me X, Y, and Z. Goes to Stream, and you can discover it and see it in Teams and SharePoint and so forth. So I am really excited about that.
The other one I wanted to tease out of you, because I think it's a cool feature, but you'll probably land maybe sort of the value prop better than I at this point. But say I wanted to get a file from you and Chris, and you would be able to bring it back to me and not be able to see what other people submitted. The feature is called request files.
Yeah.
Maybe you can talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, no, that's one, sometimes we get focused on these really hard problems. Like one we've rolled out over the last it's taken 3 years worth of work, is multi-geo, so that large multinational companies could have team sites and individuals' OneDrives and mailboxes in different locations in the same company. Massive amount of work, changed just about everything inside SharePoint. Huge portion of the team had to work on that. And so you tend to focus sometimes on these really big things, like, oh, we've got to go do multi-geo. But sometimes something that is maybe not as complex to write, but is very complicated to design and think through and iterate to get it just right. We're trying to invest a lot of capacity in the team in those sorts of things that address everyday needs, that are just delighters. And so this ability to create a folder and say, hey, everybody drop their SharePoint conference decks in here, it blasts out and automates this workflow that everybody does every day. It's just one of the reasons people will say, oh yeah, that's why I should use this thing in the cloud as opposed to storing things locally.
One thing that we've noticed kind of about your leadership across OneDrive, SharePoint, and the rest is you really practice what you preach. I know
most of the time.
Well, but let's be semi-transparent here. I'm not going to read the post, but it's only been a couple of hours since you were on stage for the keynote, and there is a SharePoint news post internally at Microsoft
that I wrote. We have a Twitter web part for SharePoint, as people know, and I wanted to put on that page the tweets for the SharePoint conference, and I could do it, but it didn't work exactly the way I wanted. So in addition to practicing what I preach, there's feedback from you want to make the product better, and so there'll be a little feedback today. But we did do a post that showed in the public language we used what this event meant, but also the things we're trying to stress from a cultural standpoint internally. Satya's really focused us on are being customer-driven, operating as one Microsoft, and embracing diversity and inclusion. And I really felt like we did that at this event in the keynote. We modeled all three of those. And so part of what I'm trying to do, just like Takeda talked about, is use our intranet to communicate to our employees. We'll have, I'm not sure about the exact number, but this is close enough. We'll have 150 new people join the OneDrive and SharePoint engineering team this year, roughly. And so not everybody in the team has been with SharePoint since Tahoe and has been to like 7 SharePoint conferences or whatever it's been, who maybe has never touched enterprise software before. And so what we've got to do is use SharePoint authentically from the leadership, including me, but also my direct reports, and use our own tool to convey to our team what we're about. And we're about customer obsession, operating as one Microsoft, and being inclusive, both internally and with the community. So,
as a consumer of our technologies, I know that you're a great advocate for our customers when you go to a strat review and do this stuff, but do you ever find yourself looking at an innovation and saying, oh yes, I know other people will use it, but I want that too?
So in addition to the OneDrive and SharePoint team, I lead the sort of core Office PM
and that little thing of Office.
PM and design team, which is sort of the biggest job I have. Our PowerPoint team is in Silicon Valley, and it was about a month or so ago, maybe 2 months, I went down and visited them. And they are working on some mind-blowing stuff that I can't talk about. In the spirit of things you saw with PowerPoint Designer, where you throw 3 pictures on a slide, we come up with alternative layouts for it. The world votes on which layouts are interesting. Our ML gets better, and we get better. We next move to icons. So if if you talk about growth and engineering and teamwork and put those on the slides, we will come up with icons to represent those. That's sort of the epiphany has gone off about the upside potential of that in creating engaging presentations with a lot less work. I mean, some of you guys do it. Like a few years ago, I did a SharePoint Saturday in Los Angeles or Minnesota, and I spent like all weekend working on that deck because I really wanted it to look good. And then I went back and think about the investment I spent and think, a bunch of what I did could be automated by AI. And so for sure, when we sit in some of these reviews, that was probably the biggest one. We're like, oh my gosh, I can't wait for the PowerPoint team to get the next round of work out.
I mean, just the one that I've been using is the designer.
Yeah.
You literally throw on top of each other 4 or 5 images, and then bloop, it aligns them, gives you a nice design.
And just you wait. I think this week, we've have SharePoint and PowerPoint working together where you can define enterprise content in SharePoint, so authoritative layouts and images and so forth. And so those suggestions cannot just be generic suggestions from the world's pool of content that gets refined, but they can be very relevant to your company. So, and again, even that is like the tip of the iceberg of what we're working on.
One other initiative I think is important for us I'd love to talk about with you today is, and you really want to.
You guys are looking at each other like
this is my joke, but
this is the question we didn't send him.
This is my joke, but I want him to say it.
I have to say, like Arthur Curry, Aquaman. Let's talk fluid. Really? That's what,
oh
that's
my God!
But let's talk about the fluid framework.
That was a Cashman pun, right?
Yes. But the fluid framework is really powerful, and I'm going to challenge you a little because I think it presents visually well, and we're on radio.
A couple things. One, it's early. Satya did a demo of that technology. Actually, Mike Morton, longtime SharePoint guy, now Office client guy, did the demo.
Was actually in your keynote while you were talking about it. I saw
he did the demo at Build, and it's early. We didn't have dedicated sessions on it at Build or here, so we're working hard. When there's a call to action in terms of getting your hands on the SDK later in the year, we'll share that. We showed it because even with all the innovation that's coming in Microsoft 365 in, say, the next quarter, we wanted to show that we had a bolder vision, because it's part of people choosing to bet on us, both as end customers and developers. Developers have a lot of great companies in the tech industry to choose from, to spend their energy on. And we do have, we've been working for the last, it's probably almost 2 years on what we now call Fluid. I keep biting my tongue because
code name.
No. Like, you guys remind me that we should not build brand equity in code names, and so I like that the idea that documents can be compound of different pieces and parts that live in different places, and those fragments can be editable independently, in communications tools, we think is a big idea. You see this in the consumer experiences. We see it in sort of the rapid rise of Teams, that people want to do work in communications and chat. Now, that doesn't mean like big content isn't even more valuable than before. You still want to write a status report for a complex project. You still need to create a pitch for a big customer presentation. You need a spreadsheet that might model a multi-billion-dollar decision. But you want to sort of go back and forth on it in sort of little fragments. Hey, Chris, could you update the budget? Hey, Mark, could you update our positioning framework? And we've got good models that we've done, moving people from attachments to links to app mentions. But this is really the next step, where we have a near zero latency way for people to edit the single version of the truth and have that transcend content and communications tools and be augmented by AI. That you saw at the end the demo where Naomi showed in Word, AI was going to help. You could mention not just each other, but AI to come in and help you in the document. And again, if we have a new platform that enables people to build apps like that with humans and agents, completing documents and doing so with fragments and different tools on different devices, it's a real breakthrough. And so we've had to do a new, if you think about the tools that people have for this today, they write to REST or WebSockets for these kinds of things. And to build that on top of those are pretty primitive layers. And so we are doing a layer above sockets that allow you to pass distributed data structures around with high speed and still keep the data integrity. And then you need a storage system that can support that. We've built one round of that in SharePoint that supports the Office real-time communications, but you really need to take it to the next level when you're talking about going from few hundred milliseconds to 100 milliseconds for it to feel instantaneously. So we have another code name that also you guys didn't want me to share. You guys and Seth and Dan remind me that you build brand equity in these things. So I referred to it in the keynote as the SharePoint Next Gen Storage Layer, which is basically a tree structure of document elements that we implement in Azure Blob Storage and SharePoint. And over this sockets protocol, you can implement different elements of it. And we didn't talk about this very much, but you can have sort of branching and versioning of all this like a source code control system, so you can use the slider to go back and forward in time and see everybody's changes. And so we got a lot of cool stuff coming there. It's not really near term. We're working hard, and there'll be steps later this year. But we felt it was good to share both at Build and at SPC so that people betting their business on Microsoft 365 and Azure saw that we had a pretty bold vision.
It's really fascinating if you reflect on some not very recent history.
Yeah.
In the 90s, we had, IBM had the Taligent initiative to be able to build more component-oriented file systems, and even we had Olay for being able to embed things into other documents. But when you start to put an Azure data center powering this and this ubiquitous, always-on, high-speed communication across devices, it's really like, we probably should have waited until we had those things before we tried to.
Yeah, another example that's a great version of like the popularity of components is we had the web part model in SharePoint for a long time. We implemented, people will remember, in V1, but then we scrambled to adapt it in the second and third release on ASP.NET, because JavaScript in the DOM in the browser wasn't sophisticated enough, to your point, to handle the things we sort of hoped and dreamed of. But it got some traction. People built lots of customized SharePoint things on the web part framework built on ASP.NET. And then JavaScript got more powerful, and super powerful. And when sort of I came back in the team and it was time to sort of take components to the new level, we built on some open source technology called React, which was a lower level component level. And then we built our component framework at the UI level, the SharePoint framework. And it is the #1 extensibility model in Office 365. It's growing. I think the slide was 375% year over year. It's just insane. And it's going to get even bigger now that we've hosted it in Teams. And so that shows you, if you get the model right, people do want to build these applications, assembling data from different places. We have an existence proof that we can do that phenomenally well in the SharePoint framework. We can now, in the future, we'll replace the plumbing of that with, instead of raw sockets and REST calls, this more higher level data platform that will make it easier for people to build these interactive component-based SharePoint sites.
So switching topics just a little bit, SPC has a full D&I track, diversity and inclusion.
Yeah.
And as you mentioned in the keynote, it's the 10th anniversary of Women of SharePoint. We have great sessions, a special event throughout SPC19. Can you share your thoughts on the importance of this value of diverse cultural backgrounds and the inclusivity to empower and support all people?
Yeah, this is, I'll be honest, this is something that I would have said from the very beginning was important to the team and I, and me personally. But I would say my understanding of the issues around it were pretty superficial, that I've learned a lot from a lot of people over the years. My family, my friends, people I've worked with, because you sort of have a little bit of this mindset of when you first started your own career that was sink or swim. It's like, yeah, it's supposed to be tough. You know, you work hard, you know, maybe somebody helps you out, you help them out. But, you know, this is a challenging industry and Microsoft's a challenging company. And so it's okay. Don't be a jerk, but, you know, and then you learn to appreciate as you talk to people. That's a gross oversimplification that I had, that for people to do their best work, they need to be inspired and feel safe and a sense of belonging, and that it's okay to admit failure and that, like, acknowledge that you're struggling on something. And as people come from different cultures and different masteries of the English language and gender, sexual orientation, race, ethnicity, every time I spent time listening to an individual or group of people about the very real challenges they had, or just the baggage, just the emotional weight it took to feel belonging, even if nobody had outwardly been discriminating against them, it was just an eye-opener. And so, you know, as to some extent, it's easy for a guy that was a white man to sort of say, hey, you know, of course I feel comfortable. All these incredibly talented people that needed this strong sense of belonging, it was time for the leaders in society, and tech companies in particular, because of our special position in a bunch of dimensions, whether it's economic or influence, for the privileged, if you will, to step up and say, this is a really, really important issue that we've got to talk about and we've got to help make a difference. That all these people in tech companies, or influenced or impacted by tech companies, we want to make them feel safe, supported, belonging, they have a voice. And so to the extent that a group of women formed a community within the SharePoint community to initiate the advancement of women in technology, like, I can't take any credit for that, but I'm so proud that they felt this community was a safe place to do that. That's like unbelievable. And so now that I understand the issue maybe a little bit better, I still have a lot to learn. Like, let's amplify that. Let's change the world. It's really important, perhaps more important than whether we sell another copy of Office 365 or not. For sure, it's a lot more important than that. So let's, myself included, keep listening and learning and step up to the responsibility.
You know, as someone whose oldest daughter is in their 20s, much as you have, there's lots of signals that there's a lot of change that we need to make as a society, and Microsoft's not immune to that either.
Yeah.
And I think it's important that we have the dialogue, because we can't start change unless we're open to it.
And there's this, you know, there's all sorts of new language that people are still working on to describe some of these problems. I use the word belonging a lot. Belonging, I think, is a good word for whether somebody doesn't just feel not discriminated, but really, truly welcome to a team or family or community. Another one we've talked about is sort of bullying and microaggressions, that even in Microsoft, there's been places where I've talked to a woman in our team who's relatively junior. Somebody might occasionally say something like, "You're not technical enough to understand that." And that is really tearing that person down. Absolutely the most counterproductive thing in the world. And so there's no reason why we shouldn't come to work every day and build each other up. What are you accomplishing by these sort of snide bullying things that frankly, an old boys club in tech might have been a badge of honor 10, 15 years ago? We got to get rid of that shit. And I think we have to step up to our responsibility in it.
It would be great to be able to influence anybody with even a bullying thought to say, whatever it is you're feeling and taking those actions, it's amazing when you help somebody.
Yeah. Yeah. And so half the battle is realizing some of us have done that in the past in the interest of like raising the bar for our team's performance, or instead of saying, that's not good enough, let me help you, let's work together to build a better user experience or something like that. We shortcut that with a comment that really tears people down, and humiliation is not a growth tactic. Perhaps it has been used too frequently in tech in the past, but certainly in our team and in Microsoft, I know Satya cares deeply about this. That is not how we're going to grow people.
So from growing the performance of a team to individual performance, I remember 3 years ago, I was fascinated when it wasn't technically SharePoint Conference, it was the Future of SharePoint event on May 4th, 2016, which was a virtual event, but it basically felt like you ran a marathon on your way to keynoting that.
I did.
And I believe you've continued that evolution.
It was gearing up for the Future of SharePoint event 3 years ago. I'd done some half marathons and ran, where I said, to keep work-life balance, one thing Jeff Rakes, longtime Office leader many years ago, told me that how you sustain high performance in business, if you have ambitious goals, is have ambitious goals in your personal life. And they can be anything as well. We're going to talk about running, but it doesn't have to be running. It can be music, it could be cooking, it could be whatever. And so I thought, okay, we have this big launch of the next generation of SharePoint coming up. How can I balance that out with something in my personal life? And so I've run a half marathon, and I've always been the person at the end who said, I can't believe these idiots who would do 2 of these back to back. What is wrong with these people? I'm exhausted. And I thought, a lot of people do it. And they're not all super athletes. I'm not a super athlete, and so why not give it a try? And I just did a few weeks ago my 7th, the London Marathon, and I'm going to Berlin later this year. I have a OneNote notebook that I store in my personal OneDrive that's got a page that for each event and the training plan that I've written and the things I've learned from the past one, and it's all very structured. And the other day I realized, wow, all this work I've done sort of to take the marathons I've done for every 6 months and use our tools to analyze my performance and optimize it for the next one. Wow, I like that. I should do that at work too. Create the OneNote notebook for the next 6 months and write down my goals and the calendar and the action plan. And so I've actually started to do that where, again, the sort of balance and ambition in your personal life helps you in your work life as well.
I was just going to correlate. If I see you signing up for another marathon, that means something big is coming.
Yes. Fortunately, this year, Ignite moved, so I can do, the problem with them in the fall was the Ignite was in the fall, and that was at the same time. Now with Ignite moving, I can do a fall marathon.
Jeff, it's been really great being able to sit down and talk to you today. We certainly hope that your next 6-month plan, looking forward to Ignite, might include a chance to check in with you and what we're announcing at Ignite as well.
I'm excited about going to Ignite. We wrote a lot of checks today. Some of them have to cash before Ignite. We have some things we're working on, as you guys well know, that we hope will be ready in time to share at Ignite. And so I'm excited to have fun the rest of the week and then get back to Redmond and get back to work.
Thank you for coming on the Intrazone again. Thank
you. You guys do an amazing job. I've heard such great feedback about the dialogue. And it was great on accessibility in a recent episode, and so thank you.
Enjoy the rest of the conference and safe running home.
Thank you. Thanks.
So So we thank Jeff Teper, CVP of SharePoint, OneDrive, and Office, for sharing all of his time here at the conference, but of course, a little bit of time with us on the Intrazone. We know that the SharePoint home sites hit the home run today. Jeff is going to be off and running somewhere.
I saw what you did there. I saw what you did there. Check out our show page for links to all of what we discussed today with Jeff and more. Go to aka.ms/theintrazone. One additional note. If you're here at SharePoint Conference right now and listening to us, you've made the right choice, because obviously the Intrazone is a far better way to stay educated and informed than going to those pesky sessions. But there's a whole number of great sessions that are coming up. I'll be presenting one later this week on the future of content services. Mark is presenting one on the nature of OneDrive and collaboration. But most of the Microsoft sessions throughout the week are also being recorded. So if you are listening to the Intrazone, you can create your own virtual SharePoint conference by streaming the keynote live at SharePoint Virtual Summit, and you can also participate in most of the sessions remotely through Tech Community.
If you're watching the Intrazone feed, stay tuned. In a couple of weeks, we'll have an episode that we actually recorded live at SPC19 with Sue Hanley, Dave Feldman, and Carrie Lambert. So stay tuned for that episode coming up a couple of weeks.
We love hearing from listeners. Please send your questions and feedback for the SharePoint and OneDrive teams. You can reach us with ideas and more via email at theintrazone@microsoft.com or out on the Twitterverse at SharePoint, at mcashman, and at cmcnulty2000.
This has been the Intrazone, a show about the SharePoint Intelligent Intranet.
Thanks so much for listening. We're your hosts, Chris McNulty and Mark Cashman.